My name is Glenn Corbett. I'm the president of the Paterson Museum Foundation. We are the sponsors of this series of historical lectures, along with our partners at the Paterson Museum. We also have a parallel series of lectures that we offer on Zoom with Passaic County historian Ed Smike, called "Stories Behind the Stories," chats with Passaic County historian Ed Smike. And so this is the inaugural lecture for the fall that we'll be presenting tonight. On your calendar, if you want to take a look at our Facebook page, all the future lectures into December with the PowerPoint presentations are all listed there. We've got several coming up over the next few months. Next week, October 5th, will be Ed Smike's first lecture of the fall. And he'll actually be interviewing a person that's just about familiar with everyone probably on this Zoom session right now. He'll be interviewing Mayor Pat Kramer about his life, him growing up in Paterson, certainly his political career, and some of the important historical initiatives that he put forth over his entire life here in Paterson. So he's also one of our members of the Paterson Museum Foundation board. Before we get started with Brian tonight, I just want to highlight a young woman here, Heather Garside. You see her on the screen. She is the person behind the screen for tonight. She'll be running the program for us electronically. Another member of our foundation, also Dave Ferrari, is one of the attendees tonight. So again, we thank you for being here tonight. Let me turn over to Jack, the Paterson Museum Director, for a few words, and then I think we can get started.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you, Glenn. Thank you, Heather, Dave, and of course, thank you, Brian. We're excited about starting up this series. Again, this is really making a permanent archive. It's not just a one-time Zoom meeting, which is really very dear to me. So we're recording all these stories, and right now, one of the biggest projects that's going on when you're up at the falls, and the only action you see, since we haven't seen much water go over, is Hinchliffe Stadium. So I'm really looking forward to it, because I don't know anybody else other than Brian LoPinto who really knows the story. I know I've gone to him many times, and I still have a lot to learn. So I'm looking forward to tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Jack. Yes, Brian is when you think of Hinchliffe Stadium, that's the first name that comes to mind, Brian LoPinto. He's the walking encyclopedia of everything you'd ever want to know about the stadium, all of its uses, its rise, its fall, and now it's coming back again. So Brian has put together for us a wonderful presentation tonight to tell us the history of the stadium, to talk about how it was developed, its use through the years for a variety of different sporting events and things. So we've been looking forward to this lecture for a very long time. So I'm going to turn it over now to Brian, who can give us the real story behind the story about Hinchliffe Stadium. So well, thank you, Brian.
Glenn, thank you. Thank you to Jack, Heather. I appreciate the time, and thank you for inviting me. It's going to be a lot of fun. So yeah, Brian LoPinto, Friends of Hinchliffe Stadium. So I'm going to do my best to try to take a 90+ year history and condense it into our conversation today. So this is a shot of Hinchliffe Stadium, as you may have seen in recent years. Just wanted to show that to you because it's looking a lot different these days with the construction crew out there now, and then 2023 when we start seeing Jackals baseball and other events there. So let's do a little recap. Hinchliffe Stadium opened in 1932. It's one of the last remaining Negro League stadiums in the United States. It's also the first national historic landmark that honors baseball, and Wrigley Field is number 2. So we're in pretty good company there. It's the only sporting venue within the boundary of a national park. Over 20 baseball Hall of Famers played at Hinchliffe Stadium, and we always call it a remarkable survivor of neglect. And as we see now, it's getting rehabilitated. So before we find out about 1932, we got to look a little bit about the past. You know, they started talking about putting a stadium in Paterson, somewhere in Paterson, as early as the early 1920s. So you look at the early 1920s, I think it was 1921 to be specific, to 1932. You see that it's taken a pretty long time for them to actually get a stadium up and running. I'm going to actually get my little trusty laser pointer here to point some things out. So what they were doing in the early 20s, they wanted to go over to the East Side section. So where East Side High School is, Park Avenue Market, They wanted to just redo that particular field, which is Barrowley Field, not named that at the time, I don't believe. And just to kind of show that this could be a great opportunity for a stadium in Paterson. Oops, sorry about that, went the wrong way. Now, that was 1921. They continued to talk about a stadium in 1926. The local media got involved here. And this is an op-ed piece that says, by all means, Paterson should have a stadium. The impetus for that was, believe it or not, a rugby game between Eastside and Central High School on Thanksgiving Day that yielded 5,500 Pattersonians, way above the capacity. And to the newspaper's point of view, they felt that that was a reason to say, hey, we need to start looking at a stadium. 1927, another year passes. There are still continued talks of a stadium. Municipal stadia that pays for itself. That's what the newspapers are calling for. They're also citing other municipalities. Jersey City on Thanksgiving Day, 20,000 people. Passaic, Rutherford also have stadiums. Let's remember this number 20,000. That's going to come into play in a little bit. Again, 1927, now it's toward the end of the year. People are saying in the press, how long before Paterson joins the ranks of progressive cities with a stadium of its own? The people would like to know. They're calling for sensible, business-like ways of handling the stadium project. And at that time, it's Mayor-elect Newman, and he's trying to get a committee together to really start talking about getting a stadium in Paterson, somewhere in Paterson. So we have a conference that's happening now. So could 1928 be the year? Well, there's a conference about Hinchliffe Stadium. It occurs at this beautiful place, the Alexander Hamilton Hotel. For those of you that are not fully aware of Paterson's downtown, that building is still with us, thankfully. And you can take a look at it. It's not a hotel anymore, but we're certainly glad that it's still with us. So could 1928 be the year? Well, could be, because they approved the stadium plan to seek financing. But what they were looking for as a possible site was the old almshouse property, which according to this, and in my research, it's Redwood Avenue and West Broadway. So think about like where Chamberlain Avenue in that area. And this is a picture of the old almshouse. They've been looking at that site as a potential site for a new stadium. Well, 1929 is upon us. Will it be 1929? Well, now we have a different mayor in charge, and that name might sound familiar to you, and that's John V. Hinchliffe. Okay, so Mayor Hinchliffe now is asking for speedy action. Now, he's saying this around September of 1929, and he's also saying that he thinks that the stadium can get done for that year's Thanksgiving Day game. So September to Thanksgiving, it's only about 2 months, kind of a very lofty goal to think you're going to build a stadium in that time. But of course, it's 1929. It didn't happen. We're also about to approach the stock market crash. So elsewhere in 1929, the Wessington Club, which they're the Wessington Athletic Club, they're based in Clifton. They were offering to have a stadium built, and it would be a gift to the city of Clifton. And the Wessingtons were a really well-run professional football team that really wanted to have a building of their own, and they were willing to build it themselves and then give it to the city. So, and then in Passaic, they already have a stadium, and the word out of Passaic is they made $9,000 that year in revenue. And to think about what that is, that's nearly $157,000 in 2022 money. So now we're talking about Paterson doesn't have a stadium. Clifton's talking about it. Passaic has one. Jersey City's doing well with theirs. There's this real idea of why is Paterson behind the time? So again, talking about 1921 to 1932, there seems to be something in the water. Paterson's taking a little too long to do things. At the same time, it's also behind the times, at least for this example here. So now 1930 comes. It's a new decade, a new approach. This gentleman right here is a really great guy. His name is Joe Guder, and he's very well-respected columnist for the Paterson Evening News. And he would always write various things about sporting events throughout the city of Paterson and even in New York City. And he really wanted to put the stadium message out there. So he changed his column and called it Stadium Mania. And Guder, in my opinion, is one of the unsung heroes of the stadium movement. So these are examples of some of his columns. So he had called them Sportgrams and then eventually changed it to Stadium Mania. This first one here, I got to point out to you. He has fabricated a conversation between him and Alexander Hamilton about the stadium. he's incorporating humor in a rather not so humorous kind of subject matter. And then this next one, he's got a cartoon here. And if you know the song from 1923, it goes a little something like this. Yes, we have no bananas. Well, this is a group of women that are saying, yes, we have no stadium. So again, incorporating some humor. This one here, he's at a barbershop. This is supposed to be Joe Gooder. And over here, the words are, it says stadium on it. And the optometrist says, close both eyes and read me the top line. So kind of this idea of, people think we're blind, but we're not. And they really want, now it's 1930. So I really believe that Joe Gooder really had a lot to do with kind of pushing that forward, even if he incorporated some humor. So again, continue with the start of a new era. Now 1930, instead of the old almshouse site, we're talking about favoring the falls as a site, which is the current location of Hinchliffe Stadium. This person, Patmos here, his name is Adrian Patmos. He's a school commissioner. He's actually the one that brought the Hinchliffe Stadium site to Mayor Hinchliffe's his attention. So at the end of the day, that was a reservoir. Prior to that, it was a burial ground. And Patmos really kind of looked at this as a possible idea. And it really struck the mayor well that was the one that he really liked best. There were other options, not only the Almshouse, but Pennington Park and Eastside Park. So of those three, Mayor Hinchliffe didn't have a real, favor for one or the other. He said, we'll figure it out. But when Patmos came to him with this is the one he liked most. This is a photograph of a construction site. This is what was going on in 1930. They're clearing out the area for the stadium. This, what they had done in 1930 is they graded the football field first. Just to give you an idea, this you should recognize as the mills right behind the stadium. This is where School 5 is currently. So you're looking at this essentially from where the falls are. And in 1930, they actually played the Thanksgiving Day game. And this is the first Thanksgiving Day game played on that site, even though the stadium wasn't completed. So the final score for that was Central 13, Eastside 0. So 1931 comes, okay, we're ready to lay out the stadium. Fanning and Shaw, they're hired to do the work. The Olmsted brothers created the master map. And of course, I hope you know the Olmsted brothers, their father, Frederick Law Olmsted. He is essentially the godfather of American parks. He had a lot to do with Central Park, of course, Boston Common, and many other places. And the sons were a big part of the Passaic County Park Commission, and they were loaned to the city of Paterson for free to lay out the stadium. So that's an interesting history right there, in my opinion. This is actually two of the layouts that the Olmsted brothers put out. And I find it rather interesting because, again, this is where School 5 is, and we know how Hinchliffe Stadium looks like. Both of these were not incorporated. As you can see, the horseshoe goes this way, not this way where it is today. So it would have been a little more angled. The baseball diamond would have been a little cockeyed here, which would have put left field really short and right field rather long. This one over here, it's more of a square. It's kind of like a bandbox, kind of something you might see in Washington where the Washington Senators might play, something that would fit in like a city block. And they would have had the baseball diamond here, so closer to the falls, and a rather different, again, not really conducive to baseball. This would have been a short right field and a long left field, which eventually in 1963, they do the opposite. Again, another bad idea, but luckily they didn't choose that. I'll give you an overview. This was the final product, just to give you an idea of what they finally did. This track here is mainly for auto racing, although even then the track was too small for human racing, as the track would be today if they were to incorporate a track. The only way to put a track to make it for either interscholastic use is to cantilever. They would have had to put it all the way further out here, and then these lines would have come out with a larger oval, just for a little bit of understanding there. So 1932, a stadium is born. On the left, this is the program from the first ever event. The first ever event wasn't even a sporting event. It was a theatrical performance on the life of George Washington for his bicentennial. That was July 8th and 9th. And to the right, that's the Eleanor Egg plaque. Eleanor Egg was qualified for the Olympics in 1928. was a beloved star. This is commissioned by Gaetano Federici, and Federici put this up. He made this, and then they placed it in the stadium on the ceremonial opening, which was September 17th. Here's some stadium firsts from 1932. The first sporting event, the House of David against the Paterson Pros, was a doubleheader. The first night baseball game was against the Cuban Stars against the Paterson Truckers. And this is an interesting note. In my research, Hinchliffe Stadium had night baseball 2 years, 9 months, and 9 days before Major League Baseball. So kind of an interesting dubious note there. And the first football game ever was the Elizabeth Pros against the Silk City Bears. Again, the Thanksgiving Day game was on the grounds in 1930, but the stadium wasn't built yet, so it was just on the turf. So also one of the firsts at Hinchliffe Stadium, John Henry Pop Lloyd has the great distinction of being the first Hall of Famer to play at Hinchliffe Stadium. He played for the Bacharach Giants. They were based out of Atlantic City. And they were actually the first African-American team to play at Hinchliffe Stadium. And that game was a doubleheader against the Paterson Pros. And Lloyd did well, as usual. 2 for 4 in the first game, 2 for 3 in the second game. This is his final season in African-American baseball. And his first year was 1906. So he's a real legend. The Portsmouth Spartans, they are the first NFL team to play a game at Hinchliffe Stadium. And Earl Dutch Clark, he played for Portsmouth. He's enshrined in the Pro Football Hall of Fame. And on the day, Paterson Giants, they lost to the Spartans by a score of 6-0. Now, the team came into town the day before. And, you know, a top flight, you know, professional football team, you think would stay, you know, here at the Alexander Hamilton Hotel. Well, they didn't. They actually stayed at the YMCA. So I can't help but wonder, was it fun to actually stay at the YMCA? You're a top flight football team and you see a hotel that is top of the line 2 blocks away. You're wondering, why are we staying at the YMCA? So the trucker, I want to go back to that actually real quick. A note from the YMCA. The morning of the game, there was actually a parade from the YMCA to Hinchliffe Stadium, escorting the Portsmouth Spartans to the game. So now, again, you're in town, you're staying at the YMCA, you're an NFL team, and you have a parade. I mean, I don't know how the guys must have felt, but I'm sure they really wanted to get out of town pretty quickly. Also in 1932, the Truckers play, again, we mentioned that earlier, the first night game at Hinchliffe Stadium. But I want to show this to you because I want to show you the headline, but I want to also go into one other thing. And remember, Hinchliffe Stadium opened in the latter half of 1932. So you're talking about a shortened baseball season. But in my research, what I found interesting was the Cuban Stars played there. And then we have a Jewish team that played at Hinchliffe Stadium, the Jewish Giants. A female player played at Hinchliffe Stadium, Kitty Kelly and her Bronx All-Stars. Of course, here's a picture of the House of David, and here's the Bacharach Giants, an African-American club. I think what I got away from the first half season of Hinchliffe Stadium operations was that Hinchliffe Stadium in Paterson was really a location of inclusion, just based on the various folks that played there. And another side note, for Negro Leagues games, there was never anything called colored seating. It was, and that's the term they used at that time. It was only adult and children. 1933, it's the first full season at Hinchliffe Stadium. Paterson City Club, they are the primary tenants. And they had a really interesting game. They welcomed the first Major League team to play at Hinchliffe Stadium, the Pittsburgh Pirates. They played there in 1933. 6 total Hall of Famers played there. Freddie Lindstrom, Pie Traynor, Archie Vaughn, Lloyd Wainer, and his brother Paul Wainer. Now there's 5 plaques here because I saved the best one for last, Honus Wagner. Honus Wagner is arguably one of the greatest ball players of all time. He was a coach with the Pittsburgh Pirates, but most importantly, he was loved in Paterson. This is Honus Wagner. I just want to go back in time a bit. 1896, there he is right here. This gentleman right here, Ed Barrow, it was the one who discovered him. Ed Barrow is in baseball's Hall of Fame, and Ed Barrow is also responsible for converting Babe Ruth from a pitcher to an outfielder. So you have some pretty heavy hitters that were here. 1896 and 1897 is when Wagner was here. And in 1896, they won the Sobey Cup, which was the Atlantic League Championship. So this was a championship ball club right there. So needless to say, because of his championship caliber, Honus Wagner was loved. So loved that 1931, there was a 50th birthday party for Honus in Paterson and by his Paterson friends. And that was actually at the Lido Venice. And for those of you who are not familiar with that, this is the Passaic River right here. This is looking from the Totowa side. Essentially, this would be McBride Avenue crossing over. And if you go there today, you could still see some remnants of the Lido Venice. It was an Italian restaurant and they had hospitality there, and that's where Honus Wagner celebrated his 50th birthday. So 1933, just kind of continuing along. The Paterson City Club, they had some great opportunities. Joe Bush came in with his Philly All-Stars. Chief Bender, who's in baseball's Hall of Fame. He wasn't playing at the time, but he was the manager of Chief Bender's House of David. And the great Jim Thorpe, he brought the Oklahoma Indians, his ball club, to Hinchliffe Stadium to play against the Paterson City Club. And this is him with the New York Giants. Of course, he's more known as one of the greatest football players, if not the greatest of all time, but he was there as a baseball player. So now the Paterson City Club, even though they had some successes, unfortunately with them, they ended up folding. So a team called the Gavin Pros showed up and they took over their lease. And the Gavins, their first order of business was to get some really good ball clubs in. So as you can see here, the Gavins add new stars. They booked the Black Yankees to play on Sunday. So that's a little bit of a precursor of what's to come in the future. So there's a local interest in high quality baseball, right? The Gavin Pros, they schedule great African-American clubs. They had 2 games against the Black Yankees, great attendance. They had a game against the Brooklyn Royal Giants, also an African-American team, great attendance. So this really piqued the interest of the local promoters in town. I'm gonna have a sip of water if you don't mind. So the Gavin Pros, they come into town and they really kind of try to make something of that 1933 season. So now the promoters are like, okay, this is really kind of working out. So 1933, they staged the Colored Championship of the Nation. Now, I have to take a side here and say that there's a lot of controversy with the series. It's mired in controversy. There's a lot going on with it. I'm not going to go into all the details, but at the end of the day, this series took about a month to complete. And that's partly because there was also the East-West All-Star game. This is during the month of September. So there's a lot of moving parts there. They couldn't really complete the series. So it took a while to complete. And in the interim, the New York Black Yankees scheduled a game against the Philadelphia Stars. Very unorthodox, but also I should remind folks that unfortunately, due to the time, it was scheduling Negro League games were very difficult. So as you would imagine, they couldn't get solid answers from people. They're always traveling. And of course, the climate of the day. So now that Philadelphia Stars game gets rained out. The New York Black Yankees win the Color Championship of the Nation, but they remembered that the game against Philadelphia was rained out. So after they win, they have a 1-game winner take all. And unfortunately, the New York Black Yankees lose and the Philadelphia Stars are now crowned champions of the nation. So very strange. That's just the tip of the iceberg. I think we could have a whole session on the Color Championship of the Nation. So now let's talk about the New York Black Yankees. Okay, the New York Black Yankees, they're a ball club that really was trying to find themselves, and I think they kind of found themselves in Paterson. So, having had a taste of the stadium, the New York Black Yankees, I'll just read this here, who have found Hinchliffe Stadium to their liking on both of their visits here, hope to end their reign with the Crawfords. This is pre the Philadelphia game, but the good part about this, the Black Yankees like Hinchliffe Stadium. The locals are really taking a like to them. So we start seeing some interesting action. The New York Black Yankees, 1934. They joined the Negro League, the Negro National Association. Paterson promoters invited the club for a 5-week trial. And of course, that trial would be the beginning of a long-standing relationship with Paterson baseball fans. It's even getting some press outside of the area. For the first time in their history, the New York Black Yankees have a home ground, and it's Hinchliffe Stadium. And you can see this is an article from the Pittsburgh Courier. So even people outside of our area were noticing Hinchliffe Stadium and the Black Yankees. Some highlights. The Black Yankees started the season with an 8-game winning streak. Of course, the great Josh Gibson would end it with a home run. In a game against the Nashville Eli Giants, 200 orphans were the guests of management, which I thought was a really kind of nice tidbit to throw out there. And the Black Yankees management stated they had financial success thanks to playing in Paterson. So that 1934 season was the first full year for Negro Leagues baseball in Hinchliffe Stadium. And that's thanks in a large part to the Gavin Pros to really kind of bring them in the early onset of 1933. So there are some not so highlights. I share this with you. This is a broadside. And as you can see, this could have been hanging on the telephone pole, as you can see by the holes there. This is also the backing, some glue. But what is interesting about this game are a couple things. The Birmingham Black Barons play at Rickwood Field, and that stadium still stands, and that's the holy grail of Negro Leagues baseball, in our opinion. And of course, Hinchliffe Stadium is where the Black Yankees played. But unfortunately, this game never took place because the Birmingham Black Barons, their bus broke down. So would have been nice to see a game between Rickwood and Hinchliffe Stadium, but unfortunately just wasn't to be. 1934, the year ends really amazingly. Dizzy Dean, he is the great Hall of Fame pitcher for the St. Louis Cardinals. And if you're familiar with baseball or not, the St. Louis Cardinals win the World Series that year, 1934. Dizzy and his brother Daffy were key components of that World Series. And they came to Paterson 10 days after winning the World Series to play against the New York Black Yankees. I can't imagine, looking at last year's World Series, if Freddie Freeman would play a game 10 days after winning the World Series, but that's what Dizzy and his brother did. And it was a great thing for Paterson. I'll show you the inside of the program. There's the Silk City Washing Company that has an ad here, Wonder Coffee Shop. These are some autographs, Dizzy Dean, Paul Dean. And here's a lineup. He played for a team called the Brooklyn Farmers. They were, think of them as an independent team, really strong team out of Brooklyn, and against the Black Yankees. So I wish I had some Black Yankees autographs there. It would be nice. So we go to 1935, just kind of going to go through some of the years really quickly. The press reports that the Black Yankees are firmly entrenched in the hearts of the local baseball fans. And that's really nice to hear that the local press really saw how Patersonians were taking to the team. I do want to say that in my research, I also wondered who were going to these games. Well, looking back to 33, 34, now we're in 35, but you got to go to the 1930 census. And the 1930 census only had African Americans at 2.1% of the population. So it really goes to show you that we all know that Paterson is very multicultural, over the years and today. But clearly, I think at the heart, Paterson was a baseball town and just really wanted to have good, productive baseball, which is why they were able to support the Black Yankees, and maybe the Paterson City Club didn't get that much support. So back to 1935, arguably the greatest game in the stadium's history. A no-hitter was pitched by Elmer McDuffie. Elmer McDuffie was a 17-season player for the Negro Leagues. A little bit of controversy, but really a great pitcher at heart. And he pitched a no-hitter at Hinchliffe Stadium. Now, 1936, we have another team that comes to town, and that's the New York Cubans. They are a great team. They are officially a part of the Negro National League, and we're grateful for their participation here. They come here and in part of 1935. Some of the highlights there. The Negro National League had interest in Hinchliffe Stadium because the Black Yankees were here and they were doing successful work here. Black Yankees, as I mentioned earlier, they're considered an independent club, and the Cubans really had a great season. In fact, Game 1 of the Negro National League Championship was played at Hinchliffe Stadium. They were played in other locations too. They were kind of shuffling those games around a bit. New York City, Philadelphia. But Game 1 of the 1935 Negro National League Championship was at Hinchliffe Stadium. And here's a picture of the 1936 New York Cubans, just to share with you. The Black Yankees did not call Hinchliffe Stadium home in 1936, but the Cubans did. During the 1935 season, the Black Yankees had a bit of an issue with the Cubans. There was even a lawsuit at hand. The feeling by James Semler, who was a big part of the ownership group with the Black Yankees, felt that Alex Pompez and the Cubans and even Abe Manley and the then Brooklyn Eagles were poaching players, so he put out a lawsuit. So I guess it would not have been easy to share a stadium under those circumstances. But another club comes into town, for lack of a better term, you can call them a white professional club, and they're the Paterson Grays, and they played some games at the stadium as well. I just want to share one of the great players from that Cubans ball club, Martin Dehigo. He is enshrined in 5 different halls of fame around the world. And not only did he pitch at Hinchliffe Stadium, he played second base. This guy was rather versatile, played every position at some point in his career. Throughout 1936, we see a team called the Mohawk Giants enter the fray. Now, why do they come into town? Well, when the New York Cubans were on a road trip, the promoters really wanted to keep baseball going. So this is a team out of Schenectady, New York. And here they're playing some top flight teams. Here's a clip of them playing the Newark Eagles. So that's another team that has played at Hinchliffe Stadium, only though in 1936. So now we go, the Black Yankees return, the Cubans leave. The Newark Eagles are starting to play some home games at Hinchliffe Stadium now. Now I want to talk a little bit about Monty Irvin. Monty Irvin, what could I say? I had a great pleasure of meeting him on a number of occasions, had great conversations with him. In 1937, he tried out for the Negro Leagues with the Newark Eagles. And he also played in Paterson with the semi-pro Smart set. And he was teammates with Larry Doby. He and Larry Doby are the only two players to try out for the Negro Leagues and actually make it at Hinchliffe Stadium. 1938 comes, the Black Yankees hold spring training at Hinchliffe Stadium. The Newark Eagles, I should say, are returning for some more games. And now we start seeing the Brooklyn Royal Giants play some home games at Hinchliffe Stadium. So throughout the time, there are always teams playing games there that way, because again, when the Eagles were on the road or playing back in Newark, you always wanted to have some consistency as much as possible. So we got the Crawfords that beat the Black Yankees. I can't even see what the top says here. I apologize, but the Crawfords are beating the Black Yankees here by a score of 11-1 here. So wanted to share that with you. But most importantly, I wanted to talk about a fellow named Rube Wiggins. Rube Wiggins has a very unique distinction of being an Eastside High School graduate. He played for the Smart set and then made his professional debut with the New York Black Yankees. And I thought that was pretty interesting, just to kind of throw that out there, that this young man lived in town, played in town, and then got to be a professional in town. Didn't have much of a Negro League career, had a very short-lived time with the Black Yankees, but he's kind of a little bit of our like Moonlight Graham, so to speak. So now we have teams such as the Wright Aeronautics and the Smart set. They're playing home games at Hinchliffe Stadium. Negro League teams are still playing in Paterson, but as the road team at Hinchliffe Stadium and at Eastside Park, actually. Just wanted to share just a little bit of the scheduling. So as you can see, Negro League teams were still coming into town, but they weren't really playing at Hinchliffe Stadium. So there was still some consistency in Paterson. The Homestead Grays, they're coming into town to play Wright Aeronautics. You got the Black Yankees playing the Smart set being the home team. So the Black Yankees were coming back to familiar grounds, and a lot of the fans like that as well. Oh, and the Newark Eagles also played at Eastside Park. So again, still had Negro Leagues baseball, but more as the visiting team. I wanted to share this game. This was the game I just mentioned a moment ago with the Black Yankees and the Smart set. And I had to point out this fellow's name right here, Larry Doby. This is one of the first times we were seeing Larry Doby's name playing outside of an Eastside High School situation. So Larry Doby is playing against the Black Yankees. In this particular game, he went 1 for 3. So he's already starting to prove himself as a ball player. So now in 1940, we've got Negro League baseball back. The Black Yankees are playing twilight games, but it's also rather limited. The Black Yankees also have other opportunities to play elsewhere in New York City, so they weren't here too much in the 1940 season. We start seeing the Smart set more often. Just wanted to make sure that, we understood that they're very important to Hinchliffe Stadium's history. And of course, they're playing against, the Royal Giants, who they are a Negro Leagues team. And we see the Larry Doby, he had starred in this game in a 9-7 victory. So now we have Monty Irvin, and he's going to be playing at Hinchliffe Stadium. He's now with the Newark Eagles, and there's some excitement about his return to Paterson. So on the stadium field, there's successes. It's reported in the press. Negro Leagues baseball is returning to Paterson this year, and that will be involving the Newark Eagles and the Newark Black Yankees. So we're going to keep going through time here. Josh Gibson, what can you say about him? He's a force to be reckoned with. When people ask me who's the greatest player to ever play at Hinchliffe Stadium, I say there's two. There's the statistical favorite, the sentimental favorite. Sentimental is Larry Doby, but Larry Doby has always said that Josh Gibson was the greatest player that he had ever seen play. And Larry Doby played against Ted Williams, Joe DiMaggio. So this is the greatest guy here, and he had a big blast here in this game for a 7-run fourth inning to defeat the Black Yankees. And just wanted to share this with you. Now we're kind of starting to see elsewhere some interesting things happen, right? Because we know Larry Doby is a big part of the integration of baseball. And this is a newspaper clipping that the Pittsburgh Pirates are starting to try out some African-American players. So we're starting to see a little bit of change here. And of course, here's Larry Doby. Now it's 42, and he gets offered a tryout for the Negro Leagues in the Newark Eagles. And at the end of the day, he makes the ball club. He plays the rest of the year with the Newark Eagles under the name of Larry Walker, and eventually does serve in our country too. 1943, Larry Doby comes back to Hinchliffe Stadium. And he plays in his first professional game as an athlete in the ballpark that made him who he is. And he was honored before the game. They actually gave him a travel bag because I guess he would need it on the road. And on the day, he went 2 for 5. Now, Larry Doby, he ends up going into the armed forces. So there's a report about that. Larry Doby reporting to the Army. So he now goes to serve our country. Had very little time in the Newark Eagles, probably about 1.5 years at most. And there's a picture of Doby with the Navy here. I want to add that the St. Louis Cardinals actually came into town, and they actually had a tryout at Hinchliffe Stadium. So kind of showing you how the facility was and how baseball was kind of this kind of hotbed, a mecca, if you will. Even the St. Louis Cardinals came to town to try to scout some players. The Uncle Sams now come into play, and they are the team that kind of, at this time, are calling Hinchliffe Stadium home, but their opponents are Negro Leagues teams. You see, they're playing the Cubans, the Black Yankees, the Homestead Grays. So still that tradition of having African-American teams in Paterson still going on. The Uncle Sams were a rather respected ball club. They actually had banquets to raise money for these. The guys did not get paid. They were a semi-pro team. And this is Larry Doby here. He was actually, an attendee at one of the banquets. This is while he was in the Negro Leagues, actually. So now we're kind of going into some odd areas with Hinchliffe Stadium. There was a column that was written by one of the Paterson papers, lamenting the fact that there is now a track at Hinchliffe Stadium that is a hard surface, and that's really kind of affecting baseball. It'll later affect football a little bit, but we'll come to find out that auto racing was a rather big revenue generator for Hinchliffe Stadium. This is 1950. Now, prior to that, we didn't have too much baseball in the tail end of the 40s, but this is the final game that occurred at Hinchliffe Stadium, the final professional game. It's a barnstorming game, and some of the players that played in that game: Carl Furillo of the Brooklyn Dodgers, Danny O'Connell, he's actually from Paterson, he played for the Pittsburgh Pirates, and Ed Sinicki, he is from Clifton and played for the Philadelphia Phillies. So I want to go into racing now. Just talking a little bit before, that hard track that was placed kind of displaced baseball at that time. So got to give major recognition to Ed Otto. I think without Ed Otto, I'm not certain that racing either comes to Hinchliffe Stadium or if it's even successful. And in my view and in my research, he may not have single-handedly did it, but in many ways it feels like he did. So Ed Otto appears at the stadium commissioners meeting to pitch an idea about staging motorcycle races. This is the first motorcycle race at Hinchliffe Stadium. Look at the packed house. If you look closely up here, this is a tree. These are people in trees. So it was sold out, or these guys just didn't want to pay a ticket. So what Ed Otto did was he offered an idea of motorsports. He said he would pay $150 a night, and they would for a guaranteed rental. That's nearly $3,000 in today's money. So, and he eventually would become one of the founders of NASCAR. Now, Otto brought in a partner. This is John Kochman. Kind of reminds me of Will Ferrell a little bit. Kochman would go by Jack Kochman later, and he'd bring in his Hell Drivers. And soon after motorcycle races, both guys would usher in midget car races. So now midget car racing comes into the fold, but they're having a tough time. And the Eastern Auto Racing Syndicate, they decide to disband midget car racing. A lot of that had to do with the fact that midget car racing kind of was more of a West Coast thing. and guys on the East Coast were kind of like piecing together carts and parts, and they were kind of jalopies at the best. And so people, even though they were spending money to go, a lot of people were leaving early, and they weren't showing up week after week. So they kind of took a pause, even though it sounds like they were leaving the stadium. So the first attempt at midget car racing was kind of interesting. I'm going to read this out loud. The newspaper reports that a veritable parade of popping and buzzing autos piloted by men who helplessly revealed their inability to manhandle the automotive industry's latest contributions on the speedway. The 10,000 spectators who paid money to see the new sport didn't wait to watch the finish. They left in disgust after the first few heats. So there were some struggles. But as we know, if those of you that know the history of racing, I think you know that it turns out pretty well. And it turns out pretty well because of a place called Gasoline Alley. Gasoline Alley in Paterson really gave midget car racing new life at Hinchliffe Stadium. That was located at East 29th Street between 17th and 18th Avenue. And it actually began in the 1920s as a series of repair shops. This is a picture of Ted Horn, who was one of the greatest racers of all time that raced at Hinchliffe Stadium at Gasoline Alley. Roscoe Pappy Huff, another legendary racer. He was a regular at Gasoline Alley. That's him on the left. And he built his famed 5 Little Pigs over at Gasoline Alley. And just another picture of Ed Horn, because I wanted to put something again of him. He's a 3-time AAA National Championship winner. Both men are in the Midget Racing Car Hall of Fame. Just wanted to show a little more of what had gone on. It went beyond that. Again, going back to Kochman, he's lauded for bringing his hell drivers here. I just wanted to show some imagery. This is kind of like a night event here with that checkered track, which looks really nice. And, we had midget auto races, as you know, so there was a lot that got on, but it really started with motorcycles. So kind of interesting how that history kind of played out. The most wins at Hinchliffe Stadium. Bronco Bill Schindler, the man had 1 leg. I mean, amazing. I mean, it's still something to be said. A lot of people can't do that with 2 legs. And he had the most wins at Hinchliffe Stadium with 52. And Art Cross has the second most wins at 47. So boxing at Hinchliffe Stadium. Let me take a sip of water now. Boxing at Hinchliffe Stadium, very big, very prominent. It was something that was a situation where you wouldn't think they would be popular there, but it really was, because it was really popular at the Armory as well. But they really got great crowds. They were really mainly known for amateur boxing, but as you can see here, they like to call it a carnival. And it was really something that they kind of reveled in, because it was more than just boxing, there was entertainment as well. I just wanted to show this here. This is an interesting, how they promoted boxing. This was a nice cartoon that they put out together to highlight Izzy Singer. He's a boxer from Paterson. I'll chat a little bit about him. And during that fight, Joe Louis showed up at Paterson. So Joe Louis was training up in Pompton Lakes, and he's arguably one of the greatest boxers of all time. Just to kind of go back to how they kind of kept boxing to be a real destination. So you were going for boxing, but then you were going to see Joe Louis. If he was there, you would see Babe Ruth, because he would show up. I'll show you that in a little bit. But I want to go back to the Singer fight. So Izzy Singer ends up getting knocked out in a different fight. And that was really kind of devastating for him. But what was interesting is who he fought against. His opponent was John Henry Lewis, and Lewis knocked out Singer with 1 minute and 45 seconds into the first round. So if you went into the Hinchliffe stands to grab a beer, you might have missed the whole fight. So John Henry Lewis was actually a great boxer. He ended up eventually fighting against Joe Louis. This is Joe Louis here, John Henry Lewis here, no relation because it's different spelling. And he ended up having a 10-year career. It was told that after the fight with Singer, he really didn't want to hit him because he was wanting to be a minister at some point in life, and he thought he could really hurt him. And I guess that's why he knocked him out and put him out of his misery really quickly. So if you know anything about boxing in the Paterson area, you got to know the Duva family. So Carl Duva, he was one of the folks that boxed at Hinchliffe Stadium. He began his career in 1929. This particular fight against Maurice Sherman would be his last fight ever. He ended his career with a 53, 9-6 record, and he is the brother of Lou Duva. And Lou Duva spent a lot of time at Hinchliffe Stadium too. A lot of it was more kind of like the logistics. I think he did fight a little bit, but he was more interested in the business aspect. Diamond Gloves, that was the big fight. They were all, I guess amateur fighters, but it was still the place to be seen, as you can see, even the local papers when Babe Ruth was in town. This is an autographed ticket. This is an actual Hinchliffe Stadium ticket. You can't see it on this side. The other side does say Hinchliffe Stadium, but I thought how interesting that their tickets were so elaborate in the size of a boxing glove and a nice autograph there. He was always accommodating when it came to Paterson. And Lou Costello, of course, came into town to perform. So he's here at Hinchliffe Stadium as well during the boxing. And the Andrews sisters, they came to town and they would sing between bouts. So when you went to a boxing event at Hinchliffe Stadium, you were certainly going to be entertained, and you were probably going to see some major stars. Football at Hinchliffe Stadium. This is an image of the Thanksgiving Day game in 1932. And so remember, 1930 was the first Thanksgiving Day game played on the surface. This would be the first Thanksgiving Day game played in the actual bowl. 3 professional teams in 1932 called Hinchliffe Stadium home: the Paterson Giants, Nighthawks, and the Silk City Bears. So teams outside of Paterson would want to play at Hinchliffe Stadium because at the end of the day, it was a great venue. So I wanted to share this. This is a game between the Passaic Red Devils and the Wessingtons of Clifton. They have their own stadiums, but here they are playing their championship game there. And NFL teams came into town. We have the Paterson Giants taking on the New York Giants, and the Paterson NFL Dodgers also came into town as well in 1932. Paterson Panthers, 1934. They are the preeminent team to play at Hinchliffe Stadium. They played a long period of time here. And 1934 was their first season. They also played against the New York Giants that season. Really lovely programs. As lovely as they are, these were rather common. Various teams throughout the country would use the same layout, but just have the team names printed. So I always thought that was special to Paterson. Apparently they were kind of semi-mass produced, although it's nice that you have the Paterson and the Bethlehem Bulldogs in that program. So a little bit about the Paterson Panthers. Played at Hinchliffe Stadium, 1933 through 42. Did not play during World War II. A lot of their players were being shipped off, so they really couldn't find other players to play. And then from 1946 to 1950, they would play. 1948, they were champions, so they won the whole thing. And a couple of notable people: Ali Sherman, he was head coach of the Panthers before he became the head coach of the New York Giants. And Augie Leo ended his professional career with the Panthers after playing 7 seasons at the top level of professional football. We have to talk about the East Side, Central, and Kennedy rivalries, right? It's one of the oldest rivalries in New Jersey. Thanksgiving Day's games always exceeded capacity. Larry Doby played in 3 of those games, and he was 2-0-1. I can't believe they actually ended the game in a tie. And of course, in one of those games, they do mention Doby and Al Kachadurian, who was another great player. And of course, in this game, they demolished Central 45-6. And as you can see, 11,500 people. At that time, Hinchliffe seated 10,000. It goes to show you they found a way to get them in. This is unfortunately the last Thanksgiving Day game at Hinchliffe Stadium was in 1996. So just wanted to share that article. There's no real mention of it because at that time, it was not clear what was happening. Entertainment at Hinchliffe Stadium. I mean, there was a lot of great entertainment going on there. We've got an opera that occurred at Hinchliffe Stadium. We have Paul Whiteman, who was a great band leader, orchestra leader that performed at Hinchliffe Stadium. Of course, you saw the Andrews sisters before. Leslie West and part of a rock festival at Hinchliffe Stadium, which is pretty interesting. Sly and the Family Stone performed at Hinchliffe Stadium, and the great Duke Ellington performed at Hinchliffe Stadium along with Tito Puente and Vaughn Monroe. This would be one of the last performances of his life because he would die, a few years later. This occurred in 1971. Believe it or not, as part of the Great Falls Festival. I highly doubt that's ever going to happen again, but you never know with the stadium being open. Maybe we can get a pretty decent act there someday. So what happened to Hinchliffe Stadium? What made it demise? Well, I look at the 1950s as the beginning of the end, right? So, America's on the move. You have advancements in the automobile, the collapse of industrial cities like Paterson. There were less and less events. So who was using the facility? Only the high schools. So 1963 is what I call the beginning of the end. The city of Paterson sells Hinchliffe Stadium to the Paterson Public Schools for $1. Okay, great investment. The Paterson Public Schools, in my opinion, already start ruining the stadium. They reorient the baseball diamond. They put it to the opposite corner. And as I mentioned in the earlier rendering, way too long. It's too long for right field, too long for left field, too short for right, not suitable for competitive play. They eventually would extend the field, also not a good thing as time would go by. And I'll give you an example just about the baseball diamond here. This is a side-by-side view. This is that look before 1940. That's the Negro Leagues diamond. This is very similar to the Polo Grounds, if you're familiar with that. This is the diamond that they reconfigured to in 1963. Again, home plate being here. This would be the long hit. This would be a short porch. Again, there's no other stadium like that at any level with this configuration. But here you can point to the Polo Grounds. I think that's the most important thing. And I'm rather hopeful that that's where the Jackals will play with that old Negro Leagues diamond next season. The 1980s come. Well, the Paterson Public Schools install AstroTurf. Not a good idea. And the company that did the extension, that original 1963 extension, and eventually the AstroTurf, there was some bad fill. Eventually you get the sinkhole. Again, I'll give you an idea of where that is. This is where the sinkhole is. This arrow was to represent where the old diamond was for a home run. But this is where the sinkhole occurred, as I just mentioned a moment ago. 1997, what a year. Got to have a drink for 1997. Paterson Public Schools labeled Hinchliffe Stadium as condemned, and that's because of their own negligence and lack of upkeep. The superintendent at the time is Laval Wilson, and he has presented two options, and this is based on a newspaper publication, a report, I guess, in the Herald and Record. You could have demolished Hinchliffe Stadium at a cost of $4 million or rehabilitate it at a cost of $4.8 million. Well, that's only $800,000 difference. So at the end of the day, $4 million is out the door. I think you can go $800,000 to completely rehabilitate a stadium. So he didn't do that. Or of course, he didn't demolish it either. So that's a good thing. But he was willing to spite a city of 150,000 people for a lousy $800,000. So with that, reading that article, continuing with that same article, Laval Wilson said that he doubts that Hinchliffe Stadium will ever be on the National Register of Historic Places. It is on the National Register of Historic Places. There's a lot of controversy with that designation. We'll go into that later. What happened was I'd read that article and I contacted the Baseball Hall of Fame. They wrote back and said the Hall of Fame certainly recognizes the significance of Hinchliffe Stadium and it is represented in our library's research collection. So that was all I needed. This is the letter that I was mentioning. Yeah, I don't live there anymore, so you don't have to try to find me. But this is the letter that I received back in 1997 that charged me to do the research that I'm talking to you about today. So kind of interesting. These are the dark years for Hinchliffe Stadium. And I just spoke about the National Register of Historic Places. Now we're in 2004. The way the story goes, the State Office of Historic Preservation here in lovely New Jersey, they claim that Hinchliffe Stadium was only locally significant on the National Register of Historic Places. They also did not tell the city that they felt this way, nor the school district. That was really problematic. This was unbeknown to the Paterson officials, that there was 3 different designations, and I have to spell it out here for you. So apparently that there are 3 designations in one designation. Again, underscore the word national. National Register of Historic Places, national significance is redundant. National Register of Historic Places, state significance, it's an oxymoron. How could something be state if it's national? And local. Of course, Hinchliffe Stadium sadly received the worst designation on this designation. So we got breaking news, folks. All right. Segregation was a national epidemic. Okay. And the Negro Leagues operated on a national level. So to reiterate, I think for those that maybe are watching this that don't know what the word national is, I put the definition here for us. It's relating to a nation. It's a common characteristic of a whole of a nation. not state or local. So we continue. This is the letter that was written by the state of New Jersey. And I love this letter, not really, because it's telling the local people where their place is, that Hinchliffe Stadium is at Maple Street, Paterson City, Passaic County. I think the locals know where they are. But what was not said, it was that it was only locally significant. As you can see, there's plenty of white space here to have done that. Yeah, so this is just another letter. I think I zoomed in to just kind of show a little bit. It didn't really come out. Yeah, I guess I wanted to really show the address here that people already knew. And I show this one more time. It's a wider look because look at all the white space. There could have been a PS saying, by the way, we've only deemed you local. And it says nowhere that in the letter. Unfortunately, let me go back to this real quick. Just one side note. The Paterson Public Schools were excited about this. They submitted for Save America's Treasures funding, and then they were declined because of the local designation. But had they known, then they wouldn't have applied, or they would have maybe challenged the designation. So it was tough because Save America's Treasures could have yielded $1 million worth of funding for Hinchliffe Stadium. The dark years of Hinchliffe Stadium continues. The Paterson Public Schools participated in a cleanup. Sounds great, right? Over 200 volunteers came out. This is in 2004. Within weeks, officials from the Paterson Public Schools destroyed historic fabric to store educational trailers on the grounds of the stadium. So again, the dark years continue, folks. Senator Frank Lautenberg, this is great, gets a $200,000 HUD grant for the Paterson Public Schools. Apparently they squandered the money because the time period lapsed and that money ended up getting reallocated. And again, I kind of jumped ahead, but the Save America's Treasures, that was again, just in a little bit of order here. So again, they got that letter about the placement. We already know that story. So Paterson voters passed a non-binding referendum, the amount of $10 million. Bonding never materialized. So that was that. So, and again, finally, the Paterson Public Schools, again, they were eligible. They were notified about this, that they were not eligible. I already went through that. I just kind of skipped ahead a bit because it's always a fun topic to talk about. Some good things happen, right? The national park comes to town. Congressman Bill Pascrell introduces a bill that forces the Park Service to include Hinchliffe Stadium within the boundary. It was never part of the original bill. That was the intent. So eventually, Congressman Pascrell has to step in, and he had to, force them to include in the boundary, which was important, which should have been done to begin with. And unfortunately, the Deputy Director Daniel Wenk at the time, he objected to the inclusion, which again prompted Congressman Pascrell to do what he had to do, and that was to really say no, it needs to be a part of the national park. And next year, when the Jackals play their first game, it will be the first baseball game or first sporting event, period, played within the boundaries of a national park. That's pretty special. So over the years, we kind of had to find partners that helped. And just to backtrack about the Friends of Hinchliffe Stadium, 1997 was when the letter was out with the Hall of Fame, but we kind of formed more officially in 2002. So just a side note on that. But over time, we always developed strong relationships. National Trust for Historic Preservation, they were amazing. Again, who do you have to find partners with? Well, it's got to be local and state officials that, when the local and state officials fail to protect it, right, you have to kind of appeal to a higher authority at times, and especially when the site is of national significance. And I do have to underscore that right there, because we always knew it was. This was a great opportunity. Hinchliffe Stadium was featured. This is the Yankee Stadium in the background, but Hinchliffe Stadium was featured in Preservation Magazine. And that really kind of helped to jumpstart the cause of getting the Hinchliffe Stadium back up and running. And that Preservation Magazine article eventually prompted Hinchliffe Stadium to be named America's 11 most endangered historic places in the country, which we needed that kind of like in-your-face designation. And thankfully, Baseball Hall of Famer Cal Ripken Jr. provided a letter of support in order to help Hinchliffe Stadium get that designation. And here's Hinchliffe Stadium's, here's the Cal Ripken letter in support of that. And we're so grateful to Ripken Jr. and the Ripken family. pardon me. Finding partners to actually help. Yep, so now we finally become America's 11th most endangered historic site. We become a national treasure under the National Trust's purview. And the National Trust really offered up a great deal of help. And we were able to get a $300,000 grant from American Express toward Hinchliffe Stadium. That also complemented the $500,000 matching grant we got from the New Jersey Historic Trust. And of course, the National Park Service, New Jersey Historic Trust, 1772 Foundation, they contributed, as I mentioned a moment ago, the $500,000 matching grant, which was clutch. And then in addition to that, the $300,000 that really helped with phase one for Hinchliffe Stadium. And that is the end of the presentation for now. I just kind of wanted to go into the history, go into kind of how we got to where we are. You all know the story about the last couple of years that now the stadium is being rehabilitated. And thankfully we'll have an anchor tenant with the New Jersey Jackals. So professional baseball now comes back to Paterson. The last time it was played was 1950. But like I said, I really kind of wanted to go through it, not quickly, but enough to kind of like give you some meat and potatoes there. So if you guys want, I can take some questions, whatever you guys want to do next.
Yeah, thank you so much, Brian, for that wonderful presentation. You took us through a lot of history here that I'm sure most of us weren't aware of, at least half of what you talked about tonight. So thank you very much.
My pleasure.
If any folks have questions, please put them in the Q&A at the tab on the bottom of your screen there. You can type in a question. I've also in the chat room put a link to our Paterson Museum Foundation website, and specifically our donation page. The PMF is a nonprofit organization that helps the Paterson Museum in a variety of ways. And this is one of them. We sponsor all the webinars that are conducted, both this series and Ed Smike's series as well. And just to make everybody aware, if you have friends who missed the program tonight, this will eventually end up on YouTube in probably about a week or two. It'll be archived on YouTube, where you can find a whole bunch of other previous presentations. So, okay, let's see here. I think we got a first question just came in. Was the Hinchliffe site also the location of the famed amusement park and picnic grounds, perhaps about 30 or 40 years earlier before Hinchliffe was built?
So my understanding about that, it was not necessarily at that exact site. I think it was just a little higher up. Now, I think I might want to bring in Jack DeStefano for some clarity on that. But if I'm not mistaken, I know the actual grounds of where Hinchliffe sits, a burial ground and a reservoir. But I am familiar with this amusement park. It's very close, right, Jack?
The roller coaster is very close to the current site. You can find it on the city atlases. It's about the best, and then it's only in a couple of hints of it in photographs. But the coaster was the biggest distinction. It's pretty much where the stadium is today. Yes.
All right. So there's a lot going on up on top of the Cascades there.
Yep.
So we have that was from Joe. Dennis just put a comment out. He really enjoyed this program. How about historic films, Brian? Where do they reside right now? Can they access historic films of Hinchliffe back in the day?
So if you're referring to any kind of filming that was shot of, say, baseball games, I wish there were. I don't think anyone ever really did. I mean, there were news reports, but there weren't any still photographers. I will tell you that I have seen historic footage of auto racing at Hinchliffe Stadium. There was a documentary that was done in the 80s, rather rudimentary, but really incorporating a lot of that old film. I don't know if that's available on YouTube or not, but yeah, I think a lot of that stuff is difficult to come by. I know that there's an archive that a university has somewhere of actually a rally. I think it was one of the Silk Strikers rallies at Hinchliffe Stadium, where it's literally just high-speed film. And it's a packed house and everyone's in suits. And I think eventually you do hear a little bit of the audio. And I think a lot of it happened to be in Italian. But that's all I've ever really seen of really like like really historic stuff when you talk about, say, pre-1950.
Jack, any thoughts on that? I guess there was a bunch of the races in later years, right? So in the 60s and what have you.
Veterans Hill drivers kept it going the longest, bursting through the flames. They put on quite the show when they were there. And the piece that Brian, you were talking about in Italian with one of the strikes going on, that you can find at libraryofcongress.com.
So there you go. There you go. We have a question from Kathy. She's thanking you, Brian, for a fascinating presentation. And she's interested in the burial ground and, of course, what happened to the folks that may have been buried there.
That's a great question. So I did read up on when they were actually, if you saw that image before with the crane in like 1930 when they were starting, there were some reports that some kids were kind of over there hanging out. And yeah, they did find some bones and, they took it. And I think some of them may have used some longer ones as baseball bats. But I don't know that they were all specifically reinterred elsewhere, which is rather disturbing, especially considering that I think, if I'm not mistaken, it was a reservoir just before it became a stadium. So you're talking about burial ground, reservoir, stadium, yeah. So I think some of it's mainly inconclusive or nothing was done at all.
Yeah, I guess there was a lot of action going on up there.
Yeah.
With the Passaic Water Company, the reservoir system up there, and then also Monument Heights. There's a lot going on up on top of the hill up there. So,
yes.
But yeah, I mean, and I guess, Jack, you probably know better than I do, but there were burial grounds all over the city, basically, what became the city, I should say.
Well, we always had a place for the dead, Norm. Remember the Sandy Hill, Roberto Clemente Park, it was that Sandy Hill section that wasn't the most buildable, so that's where we buried them. I mean, especially for, we were pretty much a colonial town in the 1790s, and we really didn't have too many church cemeteries. We only crowded them in the center, and then they were reinterred mainly to Cedar Lawn Cemetery and Laurel Grove. That was through the teens.
Right. So, and I'm sure there's a lot that predate even Sandy Hill. Sandy Hill's the first, I guess you could say, first set of organized cemeteries. So that's a program for another day. Actually, there's quite a bit written about that, and we have a bunch of photos too. So, and we can thank some of you might remember the fire talk I gave. It's because those cemeteries that we pretty much saved the rest of the east side, including Paterson General Hospital, because the fire couldn't get past the cemeteries. So anyway, Karen Patterson wants to thank you, Brian, again for a wonderful presentation tonight. So like I said, this is something that is of interest to so many people right now, Brian, as you know. Mm-hmm. And you've been spearheading this effort for a very long time. And so we all owe you a debt of gratitude for persevering through all sorts of different dark eras, as you pointed out.
I'm a glutton for punishment.
Right. Well, there's certainly a space for you, I'm sure, in Hinchliffe that you should be honored for all the work that you've done.
It's not a burial ground, is it?
Well, maybe not a real burial ground, but at least a ground where you can be memorialized. We'll put it that way. So I'm just looking here. I don't think we have any more questions at this point. Jack, any final comments?
Well, my question is, when is the book coming out, Brian?
I don't know. That's a good question. Maybe I should start on it.
Yeah, and I know. Listen, you have a lot of crossover audiences. I mean, not just the local Pattersonians and locals, but this is as you pointed out, this is a national story here about this stadium, and so I think, like I said, I think a book is certainly in the offing here. So you got to get started on it right now tonight. Okay, as soon as you log off,
I better get started.
You got to get ready for opening day of the Jack.
Oh man, now the pressure's on.
The pressure is on now. So, well, thank you so much. I want to thank Brian certainly for a wonderful presentation. Jack and Heather behind the scenes, and the Patterson Museum Foundation. I see Sharon Griggs is also on tonight. She's another trustee of our group. And so I hope that you follow us on Facebook. Look for the future presentations that will be going on through December. And I said next week we'll have Pat Kramer on to talk about his life in Paterson, and I'm sure Hinchliffe Stadium will come up in that conversation. So I look forward to seeing you all next Wednesday night, the 5th at 7 o'clock. So without further ado, I guess we'll call it an evening tonight, and thank everyone for coming.
And thank you,
Thanks for
Glenn.
having me.
Appreciate you hosting and being our president of the foundation.
Thank you, Jack.